The recent performance of the UK has been characterised by weak growth and inflation that's both high and higher than most comparable countries. Indeed, at the end of 2022, the Bank of England were forecasting a 2-year recession with high inflation. Now, the outlook for this year could hardly be more different. Growth here is set to pick up to a firm pace, and headline inflation, well, that should fall to the 2% target in April and stay there for the rest of the year. Now, after all the criticism that the Bank of England had received for allowing UK inflation to get out of control, you might expect that this scenario, well, the monetary policy makers would be delighted. But there's a problem. The fall to 2% inflation, even though it should be maintained throughout the year, that's heavily influenced by one-off effects. Wage inflation is too high for comfort, and the indications from all the surveys suggest that wage inflation is likely to remain high over the next few months. Now, with the economy picking up, the Bank of England will be afraid to cut interest rates too quickly for fear that high wage inflation will lead to a revival in price inflation above target in 2025. That's a real dilemma, but quite different than the one they have faced where inflation has been too high. Now, to understand why inflation looks set to hit 2% in April and remain there for the rest of the year, we need to start with household energy bills. Now, these are going to fall by 14% in April, and it looks like they're going to decline by a similar amount in July. Now, last April, household energy bills were up by close to 100% on a year ago. This April, they'll have fallen by 32%. Now, these effects will strongly depress inflation, and it'll continue, but only in 2024, given the outlook for wholesale prices. It won't be repeated in 2025. Sterling, well, that's another one-off effect. It was very weak in 2022, and the lagged effect of this boosted UK inflation last year. Sterling's risen since 2022, and that's going to depress inflation this year. All of this is good news, but unless it feeds through into markedly lower wage inflation, the impact, well, that'll be temporary. And the problem for the Bank of England is that their own surveys of companies suggest that they're planning to give wage increases of 5% or so this spring. In other surveys, they point to similar numbers. The 9.8% rise in the minimum wage in April will add to these worries. We do expect wage inflation to slow, but it needs to settle at around 3% for the Bank of England to be confident that the 2% inflation target will be met on a sustained basis, and only then will they be confident about cutting interest rates. And with signs that the UK economy is set to pick up strongly after the weak growth towards the end of last year, well, they're going to be in no hurry to cut rates. Now, that will not go down well with the Conservative Party, who are well behind in the polls, who would dearly love interest rate cuts to boost their popularity. Now, the government, they have been careful not to criticise the Bank of England, but backbench Conservative MPs, they've not been so hesitant. And we expect calls to cut rates to boost growth as a general election approaches to grow, with inflation remaining at 2% for several months. Meanwhile, in the US, the central bank there, they're already in the political spotlight, with vocal criticism of them from Donald Trump. And yes, the US Fed have also pushed back on market pricing for early interest rate cuts there, well, at least in part because they've also had some strong data. Only in Europe has the macro data remained weak. Now, we still think global interest rates will fall further, but the timing keeps getting pushed out. And as we are constantly reminded, it's all data dependent. I'll be giving more detail around these views and more generally explain how I think things are going on in the world economy in my webinar on Wednesday. And if you're interested and haven't signed up, just contact your Columbia Threadneedle Investments representative. Until then, or next week, goodbye.